The next session is a good fit with the theme of the rise of women in the age of #MeToo. It's a discussion on women's rights are human rights. In this session, Maja Daruwala will be in conversation with Prem Shankar, and we request their presence on the stage, please. So taking forward the theme of Nari Shakti, the two will discuss specific issues related to girls and women. Maja Daruwala is the illustrious daughter of illustrious father, Field Marshal Sam Manekshaw. She has been a columnist and is currently a senior advisor with the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative. Prem Shankar is a columnist and author. He has been editor of the Economic Times, Financial Express and Hindustan Times, and has written 12 books. His most recent book is Dawn of the Solar Age, An End to Global Warming and to Fear. Let us hear the two in discussion.
Maja, welcome to Kasoli.
Thank you. Thank you. Is your mic working?
Yes, I think. Is it working?
Yeah.
And welcome to a place where your father is revered.
Oh, thank you.
I know that. Okay. You should have seen her expressions. But
I can't hear, so that's
no, you should have seen Maya's expression. But the fact is, her father is revered, and she is his daughter.
Thank you.
What I would like to say, I'd like to talk about something, briefly tell you something else about Maja. I've known her for years, since the days when she was with the Ford Foundation. It's been my pleasure. We've been young together, which is
we've been young to, he says, can you hear? Can you hear? He says we've been young together. I just want to say he grew old, okay?
Bloody awful.
I didn't.
This is not even a cardioid mic. You know, it's a linear mic.
Okay.
Anyway, now I'll do my best. And one of the things that has struck me from reading her writings is the sheer brilliance of her mind. And then the second question that has always arisen in my mind is, why didn't she become a typical lawyer? I mean, means not a typical but a brilliant lawyer, and become a very rich and very well-known person in that field. And Maja, why? Why did you take to writing and to advocacy?
Well, actually, I became a lawyer much later in life, not at the right time as young people who go from school to college and then to law school and then into practice. And I'd also lived very, very many years outside. So when I came back, I was almost 35. And when I started to work in courts, I realized that I didn't have maybe the macho-ness to be in court, the ethics, the disregard for procedure, the disregard for propriety, the difficulty of really people who need the law getting into the law, was all of it too much for me, and I felt perhaps that really indicates my failure rather than anything, but it led me to a choice which was to work in the area of what they now politely call civil society, but really the area that I like to think of myself as occupying is civil liberties, the protection of civil liberties.
Well, our subject, as you know, is women's rights are human rights, and so the absolute core of civil liberties is in fact human rights. I'd like to say I would like to turn this phrase around, and I'd say that I would say human rights are are women's rights. There can be no human rights if there are no women's rights. long ago, when we were all primitive and lived tribal lives, women were protected. It was protected. They were respected above all, because without them there was no future for the clan or for the society. And it's only in recent times, I would say the last 100, 200 years, that a situation has arisen where, because of mechanization, because of all kinds of things which have given time to us, in a strange way this idea of protection has become an idea of dominance. And we are only now breaking out of it. And Maja has been in the lead of that. And I'm going to ask you a few specific questions about human rights, and particularly about how they affect women. First of all, you've written a great deal about the role of the police, or the lack of role of the police. Would you tell us more about that?
Yeah, sure. Before I do, I just wanted to comment a little bit on what you said. I don't think that even in ancient times there was that deep respect that you and I and this kind of audience is thinking about. I think it was protection given to someone who was physically weaker, and there was a price to pay for it. And that price was subordination. And I think to that extent it still goes on. And at the same time, when we talk about women's rights as being human rights, or human rights being women's rights, the very fact that we have to keep on and on repeating it, articulating it, means that there is a separation in the minds of society that these things, in feminist theory, women's rights are particularly emphasized because we say that while they are human rights, they are particularized to a certain gender and to a biological frame, and that frame must be respected. Many years ago, I remember the health sector researchers looking through reams and reams of disease control research, etc., on cancer, on heart disease, on Alzheimer's, and realizing that 90% of it was with research for men, of men. And so the feminist view was, this does not pertain to the physicality of women, so you have to look at it that way. So it was the bringing in of the particularity that has now become mainstream. And about the police, of course, I can talk reams and reams, but I mean, what do you want to talk about?
Well, one thing that really, it's always amused me but also disturbed me, is that when you meet policemen and ask them about why you are not following procedures, why you don't respect the rights of the civilians whom you're expected to whom your duty is to protect, and particularly so in the case of women, you come up with a sort of a lament. It's society's fault. We are not this, we are not that, we're not given this, we're not given that, we are not understood. We are the victims, is the line that they take. And how do you react to this?
I react to it with complete scorn, frankly. In terms of the police, I should say very quickly that I really believe that if we don't have systemic reform, and that can be, a lot of people feel that can only be gradual, that society will change slowly and then the police will change slowly. But in the meantime, the price that the public is paying of tragedy, of individual tragedy, of communities, of subordination, etc., is so deep that I really think that now there is a moment, well, the moment hasn't come, but I think that we can no longer talk about this gradualist approach, but we must start to talk about radical restructuring of the police. Of course, there are no takers for this. But one of the things I also believe, bringing it back to women, is that today the police can defend themselves, that we are the defenders of between the society and bad people, between society and terrorists, between society and Naxals, urban Naxals, whatever new name they create for creating people who are other than themselves. But one of the things that I have seen that has become very interesting in the sense that it has public resonance is that the police cannot defend their behavior, their actions in relation to their response to women. Their behavior towards them, as well as when women go to complain. The inability of a state agency to protect half its population, I don't think has been as deeply realized and has not created the kind of anger in society that it should.
You talk of systemic reform. Can you? I have a couple of thoughts on this too, but could you please tell me what you think of would be let's say the 2 or 3 most fundamental ones from which others would follow?
As I said, honestly, if I had my way and if I was ruling the earth, I would disband the police and start all over again. I would, because tell me what is the virtue of them if they cannot protect the population at large. It's not every day that you have a protest. It's not every place that has a terror cell. Of course these things are to be dealt with. But what about the average everyday performance of a policeman? I'm sorry, I've forgotten your question. Where would I start? Okay. I think that the police bitterly complain and the public anecdotally recognizes that the close nexus between political interference. I want to clarify this. Illegitimate political interference is not the same as civilian oversight of the police. In a democratic state, you have to have the police being answerable to the law, first of all, and only to the law, but procedurally to the legislature. They must. They cannot be allowed to run amok or be autonomous. What they need to have is operational responsibility. Today, the level of control over the police, which has been created in statute itself, especially the new statutes that have come about. I'll give you an example of, say, Maharashtra, where the police chief is not at liberty, despite the Supreme Court's orders, to make the kind of operational changes in the management and administration of his cohort. How can you possibly have a management system that is answerable within and therefore answerable outside if you don't have that? If you break up the management system, you break up the accountability and the responsibility. मैंने नहीं किया, भाई साहब ने कहा था तो मैंने कर लिया. लेकिन भाई साहब कौन है? भाई साहब मेरे भतीजे हैं या मेरे चाचे हैं या उन्होंने कहा था, टेलीफोन में कहा था. I remember Khushwant ji, who was a kind of mentor to me when I first started, saying to me, you don't need legislation. When the man picks up the phone and says transfer so-and-so or arrest so-and-so, all you say is, I certainly will, sir, just put it into writing. And that doesn't happen anymore because everybody's interests are aligned.
Maja, may I talk, you hinted at it, may I specify what the alignment is? The alignment is the constant need of political parties for money. And born out of that, an unfathomable greed for more and more and more money. We've created a political system in which there is no funding, no legal funding for elections when we have the largest constituencies in the world. The British constituency, parliamentary constituency, is 370 square kilometers. Our constituency is 6,000 square kilometers. And we have no system of funding. So we use every means, and to do that, we also use the police. Am I right?
You're right. You're absolutely right. And these are large structural issues. On the other hand, the kind of impunity that this arrangement has allowed policemen down the line to go into business for themselves. As I said, the accountability is not there. Now, there's no politico who's coming and whispering in the ear of the SHO, "Ke bhai isko maar thok dalo." But he's doing it. So you're changing the culture. You're changing the culture so much that it is now absolutely out of your hands. The other part is that and the police do say this when they are explaining their victimhood, they do say that we are not given control, we are also not given the wherewithal with which to do our jobs. If you look at the manpower shortage, it is frightening. If you look at the shortage of equipment, if you look at the lack of training and the lack of forensics, if you don't know in a large area that you are controlling in the small towns, in the rural areas, you don't even know how to protect and secure a crime scene, all you can do is pick up somebody who has been marginally suspected or who happens to be there, or if there's public pressure and if there is community pressure, you pick up somebody who is known as a genuine bad character and then you topo it on him. And then you use that in the courts. And then the courts are also, they say, helpless to actually go into the detail of whether there is evidence, etc. Because everything is now on he said, she said, they said, we said, and it's on hearsay. A great many of the judgments, etc., that you see in the lower courts, and the lower courts is what we should be looking at, because they are the courts that 9/10 of everybody approaches. What we hear about is the Supreme Court. What we hear about is the High Court. But it's the injustice at the lower court level, not only for criminal behavior, but for civil disputes. If I go and trespass in Prem's house, how the hell is he going to get me out? And all of this, we are living on top of all of this foundation of injustice. And we are not enough worried about it.
Yes, we are living on top of a foundation of injustice, and the foundation is shaking, and we do our best to pretend that we are still in balance. That's the situation we are in. Maja, thank you for that. We could have gone on this issue for the rest of the time, but I will come back to our central issue, which is women and human rights. And I want to ask you, we're seeing a wonderful revolution. We're seeing the Me Too revolution today. At long last, women are shedding fear and talking and coming forward and saying, this has happened to us also. And it's like a sort of a huge can of worms where you've taken off the top, and it's only going to grow. I think it's a very heartening development. But tell me one thing. Now this is happening, can I ask you, in your decision not to practice law and some of the things you mentioned, some of the kind of behaviors that you came across which decided you not to stay, did you ever sense any sexual harassment yourself?
Yes, of course I did. Of course I did. And I'm willing to shake the hand of the woman who says that she hasn't. I practiced in the 30 Hazari courts, I practiced in the Patiala House courts, I practiced in the High Court and in the Supreme Court. And if you can imagine it, I was 35, 40 years younger. I worked with two very handsome looking men. And the comments about the relationship I had, I was a married woman with 2 children. And 2 children who used to come to court to watch me. And the comments that they had to hear about my relationship with these 2 men, about how I came to be in court because of my sexual relationship with these 2 men. In the canteens and lots of other places, I remember being in a divorce case where I was, actually I was for the man, and the woman's lawyer was standing behind me. And all she kept saying, there was the judge, there was myself, there was the judge, there were the two parties, there were the two lawyers, and there was an additional lawyer behind me. And all he kept saying in my ear was, you bitch, you bitch, you bloody bitch. That's all he said. And I looked up at the judge and I said, sir, would you like to hear what he's saying? And he said, chalo, 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 jaldi karo. That was what his reaction was. So reactions, even today, and we are all experiencing it. Reactions even today. You are having a paper with a headline, 4 or 5 papers this morning with a headline naming people who have been accused by several people of inappropriate behavior. This may not be criminal behavior. This is intimidating behavior. This is behavior that is brought out of power relations. If the signal we are all waiting for, all of us here are waiting for, is what is going to be the signal from your editors, from your political parties, from your journalists. What is the signal? If there is no signal, if there is no reaction, then that is a strong signal. We are going to do nothing about it. We are going to tolerate it because these people don't matter to us. So you talk about human rights and women's rights, this is where we bite the dust.
Maja, thank you for that humbling, searing.
And you're not saying it to me. You're saying it to 50% of the population of this country. You can be beaten, you can be hurt, you can be harmed, but you are the baddie for coming out and saying it.
Well, I think comment on that is absolutely unnecessary, except to say that I think all of us, I'm sure, share what you feel and feel humbled, and I think I would personally say that you have reawoken a sense of responsibility in me, reminded me of a responsibility that we need constantly to be reminded of towards our colleagues in our workplace. Thank you very much. I want to, we have a little time, and then I want 5 minutes at least for questions. So I want to ask you a little bit about the whole question of rape and the rape laws we have in India. I want to ask you about the question of rape, sexual harassment, molestation in the workplace, and broadly speaking, the late rape laws that we passed after the Arushi case. And so, would you like to comment on them and how they are working and how they could work better?
Yeah. You know, a lot of people in court, especially my colleague lawyers, etc., and the police, tell me that these new rape laws, because they are broader, they are more permissible, it's more permissive, have in some way created this huge sense of injustice, a playing field for people who would like to exploit it. But one forgets that earlier we have on the books the same kinds of laws if they had been used in the same way, but they were used in the same way. So the injustice is throughout. The malpractice is throughout. The inability to access is throughout. Was there before? Is there now? So I think that the issue is wrongly framed. It's not about the breadth of the rape law as much as the inability of the justice system to deliver the justice that it should be able to deliver. That, when I talk about policing, supposing instead of talking about policing, we talked about the criminal justice system, there is huge disrepair at the subordinate court level. There are huge vacancies. There are huge lack of infrastructure. There is huge lack of knowledge and training. And nobody has done an empirical study on this that is large enough for me to quote. But anecdotally, thinking of your own lives, I would say there are less than 1% of people, of women, who can go alone without the assistance of an NGO or her brother-in-law or her sister, to a police station and onward into court and fight a case for herself. Can you imagine it? And yet we pay no attention to the fact that you can't do it. So I did a study in Bombay of it was a victimization perception, and there's been another one done recently. And though my sample size was very, very small, we found we didn't ask the question about rape, but we asked the question about sexual harassment. And only 1 out of 15 actually went to the police station to mention it. And there was no FIR filed, and that's why it's such a small sample that it doesn't have any legitimacy. But supposing it did have, 1 out of 15 is even of the experience, crime is even reported, and that was not made into an FIR. So can you imagine the depth of it? But I won't talk anymore, please.
No, I think that this figure of 1 out of 15, and you've given other data in some of the articles you've written. I recommend everyone, if you're interested, go to Maja's, just say Maja Daruwala articles in Google, and just please read what comes out, because it will be an education in itself. I agree with you, and I've thought very deeply about the rape laws as they were framed, and particularly the conjunction of rape with sexual harassment that took place in our law, and its consequences. And I've made only one suggestion in all the time that I've written on this. There are not too many articles, but I have written a few, and I want to get your opinion on this for the audience, and right or wrong. I feel that the only thing we need today is to enforce anonymity on both sides. What we have today in the particularly where sexual harassment is concerned, is that the names of the men who are supposed to have done sexual harassing are immediately flashed and are all over television, etc. And the women are not. And then the case goes on for years. We don't know what is going to happen to it, but the man has already been found guilty before any question of innocence and guilt could be determined. And would you? What should we do? I mean, would you agree with this? And what if any reform would you like to advocate if you think that this should be done?
It's really a can of worms, and as they say in Hindi serials, ये बड़ा पेचीदा मामला है. And I'm not going to comment on it because I've got a big thing about Aadhaar. I've got another big thing about registers for sexual offenders. And I really believe that law and justice must be done in the public sphere. And in-camera hearings, etc., are to be a very carefully crafted exception to the rule. But that's a very traditional lawyer's way of thinking about it. I honestly haven't thought about how as deeply as I would like to, but I don't think that you can create any kind of principled response in a system that is so broken.
I think that final remark really sums up the state of law in relation to human rights, women, rape, and everything. And I think it also is a good point to open the floor for questions. We have 2 minutes, Gitanjali. Two questions. Just two questions.
Sir, please.
Good afternoon. You have very rightly pointed a very strong and a correct finger towards the government, whether we police, whether we judges, whether we politicians. And you've done it very correctly, and there are no two views about it. What I would like to share with you is, you're missing the main point. Where does it start from? It starts from the mother, the grandmother, the Nana and Dadi. You do not teach your children at the young age, when they are children, between brother and sisters, nieces and nephews. Boy, she's a niece, and this is the way you have to behave. This has to start from Nana, Nani, mother and father. It's very easy to point a finger at here, and very rightly you've done it. There's no two ways about it. But when you're looking for a solution, please look at yourself as a family. We always say, so-and-so a rape there was no CCTV camera, and the boy raped there. But I will request everybody, have you taught your son? Have you blamed your nephew? No, we don't. So my request is, do look for solutions in all spheres. When you point one finger towards the police, one towards the judge, about 2-3 fingers point towards yourself. And those 2-3 fingers go to the Nana, Nani, mother, Dada, Dadi. They have to be told, okay, yes, boy, you have to respect your sister. Now, thank you.
May I?
Very quickly.
May I add?
Very short.
May I add to what he said? You see, you can understand the drives of a young man at 14, 15, 16, which is the sexual drives.
No, sir, I can't understand it.
Just a moment, ma'am. I'm adding to that. Now, the question is, it is at the village level where the messages in the newspapers don't reach, in the remote villages. It is the backward people who are actually indulging in a lot of these things. Lots of these things.
That isn't actually factually correct.
Backward, when I say backward, you see the slums. It is the NGOs, it is the villages, it is the NGOs, it is the SHOs, it is the schools.
There's no
where education has to spread.
I'm so sorry, sir. Please do forgive me, but we have to stop this session now and continue with the next one because people are waiting. Thank you. Thank you for your understanding. Thank you for a very interesting discussion. Thank you.